Thanks, Gab. Okay, hearing no questions, I'm going to move over to that second research stream, the frameworks for sustainable decision making. This is a recognition that sustainability is certainly about the dollars and cents, but it also moves beyond it as well. So we wanted to think more about how you can make decisions around projects and initiatives, thinking about the impacts and the larger impacts that you can have on multiple sustainability priorities in one go. So internally, we have developed a Solve tool. This is an Excel-based decision-making tool that a company can use to input your sustainability priorities, bring in stakeholder feedback, and ultimately make a decision about which projects can help you get benefit in multiple sustainability areas. As we think externally, we have done a multi-year project focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. You'll hear a little bit more about some of that work later, but it's been a great opportunity to think about how that framework can help companies make decisions about new programs and new initiatives that they're putting together in the sustainability space. The third research stream that we have ongoing is our enhancing stakeholder engagement. If you work in sustainability, heck, if you work at a company, you recognize that it's hard to do many things without reaching out to peers and connecting to other groups that you work with. So the whole point of this research thread is to help our sustainability professionals connect with others who are a part of this broader conversation that we're trying to have. A couple of years ago, we focused our research on the Enterprise Risk Management Group, and what we realized is that ERM is really thinking about near to midterm risk. Our sustainability folks are thinking about that long-term, is their company going to exist in the future risk? And ultimately, there was a desire from both of them to really come together and have a better relationship, a stronger relationship. We were able to take those research results into a 2-day workshop where we kind of brought both sides together, had a conversation, and laid the foundation in order to continue that relationship into the future. Sadly, it was virtual, but I think it was one of the most robust conversations and engagement pieces that we've had, and we've heard wonderful things about it from all of our members. And as we look into the future, supply chain is actually our focus for this year, in recognition that there is growing investor and stakeholder interest in understanding both up and down your supply chain, some of the decisions that you are making. Last, but certainly not least, in our Strategic Sustainability Science program is our Sustainable Electricity Resource Nexus. This is where we really start to think beyond the company and into those communities and engaging with the public. So we have a quarterly newsletter that goes out, a public newsletter that talks about the work that we're doing, the work that EPRI is doing that is relevant to the sustainability conversation. We are also planning for the return of our Sustainable Energy Resource Research Summit in November, bringing everybody together in DC for a day of conversation, and not only within our industry, but with industry stakeholders as well. So we did it in 2019. As you might have imagined, COVID made it a little tricky to get together in person for the past couple of years. So we're really excited to be able to see everybody's faces in person again. In a nutshell, that is our Strategic Sustainability Science program. I'm going to move into our Energy Sustainability Interest Group, which is a separate project that is runs in parallel to this program, but I want to take a moment to just pause and see if there are any questions from anyone on the line. Okay, I'll continue to keep an eye on the chat just in case you think of anything. You're welcome to drop it in there. But moving on to our Energy Sustainability Interest Group. So this is really where we think about tools and resources to develop, to execute, or to continue to grow your sustainability program work. So this is a little bit more cyclical, which is why we have a nice circle in the upper right-hand corner. And I think that circle provides a great opportunity to walk you through and provide an idea of what we do here. So starting with the little blue arrow, we work to identify sustainability priorities. We, every couple of years, publish out a report identifying the sustainability priorities at the North American electric power industry level. So 20 different priorities in our last report, which was published out last year. It's publicly available. You all have access to that. We identified 20 sustainability priorities. We also matched that with 3 emerging priorities and 3 management elements for a pretty robust list of 26 sustainability priority conversation points that you need to kind of be thinking about and keeping track of. Once you know what your priorities are, many companies seek to determine goals so that they can track progress on those priorities to set an intention of where they want to go and kind of think a little bit about where they are now. Once you've got goals set, you move on to measuring and managing performance. So we start to talk about metrics. What metrics are you using to track progress on those goals? We have a metrics database that reflects the metrics that are currently in use within our industry, and then we also pull in the metrics in use within those ranking frameworks that you might have been participating with. So we bring those in and make sure that they are included in our database as well. As you can imagine, we have a fairly robust database of around 5,000 metrics to help inform you in the conversations around how you can track progress on those goals. From there, we move into benchmarking with peers. As you might imagine, we are not going to benchmark on 5,000 metrics. We have a subset of those metrics, closer to 200, that companies can participate in and provide data on to see where they are in comparison to their peers. And the purpose of this effort is not to determine who's doing better than whom, but it's really an opportunity to learn from each other. Where are you in comparison to somebody who is geographically similar to you, who is structurally similar to you, or who has a similar size, so that you can have a conversation with that individual. You know, how did you get to where you are? How can we move things in a similar way to how you did? But also within your company as well, to do a gut check, right? Here's where we are and here's where we should think about going, and let's talk about how to make progress in that. Of course, the circle has got to end with reporting and engaging stakeholders. It's very important to be talking about the sustainability work that you do. So we do an annual voluntary reporting trend survey to understand where each of our members is discussing their sustainability efforts and initiatives, both within the corporate sustainability reporting framework, but also thinking about all of those 40 different rating, ranking, and other frameworks that are in existence as well, because we've certainly seen an evolution. There are more and more each year, but we've also certainly seen a change in drivers from stakeholders' interests and where companies are perceiving value from those different activities as well. So I've just said a lot about two different opportunities for collaborative engagement with us in our research. I'm going to pause just for another minute more, and then we will move on to talk about some of the research that we have done to give you a better flavor of what is going on here. But any initial questions? Okay. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Brenda Brickhouse to take us through the intersection of equity and resilience, including nature-based solutions. Brenda?
Great. Thanks, Fiona. I really appreciate that. So we've been doing a lot of thinking lately about equity and resilience, and so really thinking about those issues fairly broadly. When we think about equity in general, we're really talking about who bears the burdens and the benefits of our energy systems, right? And so really thinking about, are there particular communities, subsets of communities, portions of our regions, where there are people who are bearing more of the burdens from that, in many cases, industrial infrastructure of energy, but also where their service and their access to energy may be limited. So really thinking about that distribution, that fairness of distribution, and that access that folks have. And so thinking about resilience, particularly as we're thinking more about climate change, you know, how are these folks going to be impacted in the future? And are their situations going to be improved or able to be improved by some of the clean energy transitions that we're going through? Or are they going to continue to be hindered and continue to be harmed by some of the facilities or the infrastructure that surrounds them or serves them? We think about it in a couple of ways. You know, these words have a lot of meanings depending on the context that one is speaking, but we have a couple of definitions on this slide to take a look at. Energy equity is really thinking about that affordable and equitable access to energy, services, and benefits that it provides. Also being included in decision making, and that's an important piece of equity as well. Who's at the table? Who's helping to make these decisions? We think about climate equity, really relates to climate change and environmental and social justice. Who are bearing the burdens? Who are on those front lines, if you will, of climate change is something to think about. So we did a study, research last year and into this year, and really thinking about how addressing equity and resilience together may really influence or change our priorities, our strategy, and our approach when we think about it, infrastructure and community planning. So this is really beyond the utility itself, but that those partnerships and those working together with local, regional governments, that those decisions for community planning have got to be made at a more holistic level. We certainly recognize that climate change and extreme weather are impacting community resilience in a lot of ways beyond their utilities, but their utilities play a key role in that. And so how do we really think about those risks, those consequences, the likelihoods, and what are those costs and how are those costs distributed? And then how do we prioritize our resilience measures accordingly? So we have some work in that space to be able to help think strategically about those kinds of decisions. And as we think about the opportunities that are going on in this energy transition, particularly for those vulnerable communities, we really do have an opportunity, we believe and have found, to be able to advance those communities. Really thinking about community resilience as a whole and thinking about how we can positively advance society and equity across those vulnerable communities, in particular working with local governments. So the next slide, please. So thinking a little bit deeper about that, about nature-based solutions, thinking about, the natural solutions that can, in particular, mitigate wildfire, extreme weather events. We mentioned, climate justice on the previous slide, but certainly these, there's a significant opportunity to be able to think about wetlands, to be able to think about tree cover and forests, to be able to think about flooding, to be able to think about extreme heat. What are our opportunities with nature solutions to be able to address some of those issues? Certainly this is, again, would be a partnership through utilities as well as large land management or even small land management organizations in a particular community or particular region. But you can see some of the statistics there that show that a focus on nature-based solutions, on natural resilience, can indeed provide respite from heat, respite from flooding, and really some of the other issues that climate change has brought to the fore much more than ever before. Next slide, please. We're hearing from members of the programs that address nature-based solutions. We're hearing a growing interest in really being able to sustainably manage, restore, and even in some cases, modify our existing ecosystems to help address some of these societal changes. So it's certainly, we think about it in a more holistic sense relative to both the conservation of natural resources as well as human well-being. And that term nature-based solutions is what we've come up with, or not, we have not, sorry, that's the term that's being applied more and more to some of these more resilient, more natural-based opportunities that we have to address flooding, to address water quality, to address biodiversity issues, and certainly to think about, groundwater, water temperatures, those kinds of environmental impacts that are impacting both our natural ecosystems and species, as well as the people that are dependent on them or living amongst those, right? Stream restorations, habitat protection, a lot of pollinator work. We're concerned about pollinators relative to food supply and the biodiversity that is part of the fabric that keeps our planet really working like it should, right? And thinking a lot about wetlands and riparian buffers, impervious surfaces, controlling flooding. I know in the US and in Europe, we've seen extraordinary flooding in the last several years. Have certainly expect that to continue. And more of these natural solutions, not dependent on hardening and stormwater channeling, but really focusing on what's that carrying capacity of some of these natural systems that's greater than our typical engineered solutions, hard engineered solutions to stormwater and water management. So those are a few of the things that we are thinking about. The last slide here is thinking about how EPRI can help in some of the efforts that we've been working on. So this is just one example or a taste of how one might go about planning or road mapping your strategy for thinking about nature-based solutions, right? So thinking about what are those inputs? What are those climate stressors? What's current condition in terms of land use? What are the regulations and operations that are constraining in some of these decisions? Getting down to more granular level, what are those metrics? What are those actual characteristics that we're trying to control? And then taking a look at what are some of those opportunities, right? What are the drivers or opportunities or constraints that are to think about when we're designing systems that can help manage these issues that we're talking about? And then some of the outcomes could very well be operational changes to our operations, particularly if you're talking about a power plant that's using a fair bit of water in a given region, pondering how that power plant may change its operations. Integrated water management, really thinking about water flows, thinking about the water, the controls that we have through hydroelectric and other reservoir and flood control systems. How do we integrate with industry, with those water management districts or those entities, and really thinking overall about water stewardship, both for our operations and for our communities. So it's very much of a holistic way of looking, but focused yet again on the Earth's capacity, nature's capacity to manage the issues before us and create more sustainable solutions in the long run. The next slide, please. A couple of case studies. These are from the US. We had a couple of projects. These were both focused on water. And so thinking about stream restoration, there are pros and cons to some of these kinds of projects. And so the beauty in these projects is that if you're going after floodwater mitigation, you're at the same time likely can be able to address other issues as well. Urban heat island effects, energy consumption, right? When we think about shading and cooling, biodiversity certainly is a big piece of that. I would say that in addition to these both social and environmental benefits, certainly sees a lot of enhanced reputation, right? Which is always a great thing to be able to think about. How can we be recognized for the work that we're doing, particularly environmental work? There are some challenges, however, like any project, any kind of construction project, if you will, ongoing maintenance. So somewhat different from engineered structures and hard structures. They require maintenance as well. But certainly these natural projects require ongoing maintenance to ensure that tree cover is maintained, that native species are not coming in and taking over. There's a certain amount of depending on the project, it will certainly depend on what that maintenance would be. Dense urban environments do indeed present a challenge to be able to carve out, if you will, the space and the land, and in some cases also in the regulatory and sort of the way that we interface with those systems. The urban environments can present a challenge, but it's not something we can't overcome with very smart and very collaborative approaches to be able to design systems and design environments that can benefit even in small ways, in small blocks, if you will. Every one of these requires a site-specific approach, and really thinking about, and I'll point out environmental justice there. We talked about equity in the beginning. So let's think about there may be an opportunity to replace an old fossil facility that's in an urban area. That fossil facility may have provided jobs for that local community or the neighborhood that within which it sits, but it also has brought upon the neighborhood over time increased pollutant levels, probably impacted the ambient air quality in a region, and so there may be an opportunity to restore that plant site, old former plant site, brownfield, if you will, into a park, into a natural area, need to think about the environmental benefits from that, but also think about the socioeconomic impacts from that. Maybe taking away jobs that can't be replaced, that new facility, if it's a park system, may or may not have equivalent or even close to the number or the pay scale of the jobs that were there before. Is there a compromise? Is there a collaborative? Is there a creative way to be able to both restore, apply nature-based solution processes and thinking to that situation, as well as to provide community development and economic as well? So those are some of the things that come to mind, just giving you a little bit of a taste of how we try to think about employing a nature-based solution in a project like this. So I'll pause there. Are there any questions or conversations that anyone would like to share when they've thought about nature-based solutions relative to our electric infrastructure?
I've seen they pop into the chat. I appreciate that so many people have been introducing themselves. Don't forget that you can unmute and jump into the conversation if you would like to contribute either a story about a nature-based conversation that you've already had or any reflecting on anything that Brenda said.
All right.
Well, thank you so much, Brenda. I always think it's fascinating to talk about nature-based solutions, and it's something that we've been talking about a number of times. I distinctly remember a conversation about the benefits of trees in cities, and it was incredibly eye-opening to think about trees in a whole new perspective. So I appreciate any time we can have these conversations around our table. Moving forward into an interactive session on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So I know a number of you have been participating with us in the chat. You're going to see a Slido pop up. So it's a fancy way of doing a poll. You should see it pop open onto your screen in just a moment. So you have the opportunity to respond to that Slido while we walk you through some of the research that we have been doing on the Sustainable Development Goals. And if you don't see the Slido pop up, you can click on Apps at the bottom of the screen, so you can kind of see it circled down there. If you click on Apps down there, and then the first one should be Slido. If you click on that, there's a sustainability and utility practice, and I can see that they are open for me. Brenda, can you tell me that they are open for you? Just give me a thumbs up because I can still see your image.
I do not see the Slido in the chat.
Oh, not in the chat, sorry. Oh, Robin gave me a thumbs up. Okay, so it should be, again, it's in Apps. If you click on Apps and then you click on Sustainability and Utility Practice, and I see that there are 3 companies up there, or 3 questions that are up there for you. The first one being, does your company currently map to the UN SDGs? And then the second one, what level of the SDGs does your company map to? And then the last one asking me about your top reasons for mapping to the SDGs. So you've got a couple minutes to respond to that poll. Highly encourage you to just take a moment. It's radial buttons. It should be nice and easy to complete. And with that, while you're completing that, I'm going to pass you over to Gabriella Siegfried from the EPRI team to walk you through the research that we've done thus far.
Thanks, Fiona. Yes, I appreciate Brenda's nature-based solutions presentation. I'm glad to see so many people from all over Europe in our chat and in this workshop today. So really glad to be here. Thanks for coming. I'll just describe some of our research around the SDGs, some of the research and development we're doing. It started with many research requests related to the SDGs as electric power industry stakeholders conveyed their interest to many of our members here in North America. And there's been discourse around achieving goals outlined by the UN. And we then published the understanding application of UN SDGs to provide an overview and provide some initial research that launched this greater research stream that we're still developing and we've done some work in. So one of the driving questions that we found when discussing with our members and initiating that first 2020 deliverable was how can power companies drive progress on the SDGs? And we kind of found a bit of a research gap because there's a drastically different effort when you're mapping to the goals versus the targets versus the indicators. So we had to kind of ruminate on that as a sustainability team, and thus the SDG mapping project was launched and kind of designed to go deeper than just an SDG overview. We wanted to do the nuanced work of thinking through each indicator with our subject matter experts and deciding the level of impact a North American electric power company and the North American electric power industry may have on the indicator and the achievement of the greater target and the greater goal. So we extended the first deliverable, went into this mapping project where we provided categories and kind of went through thought exercises together. We did several rounds of thought exercises looking at the 247 indicators, deciding whether or not, through our expertise, if a electric power company could provide direct progress or direct impact to this indicator, whether they could have provide tangential through their core business functions, tangential business functions, if they could progress this indicator, or whether or not this indicator might be negligible. The power company in the US or in North America may have negligible impact on progressing this indicator. It was more of a qualitative approach to the mapping. It took a lot of thought, it took a lot of discussion, and sometimes even some not argument, but going back and forth with what we all thought and where we come from our own expertise. And what developed from that was an SDG mapping matrix tool. It's an Excel sheet that has all of the goals, all of the targets, all of the indicators, and provides our impact categorization. And then an explanation for our impact reasoning, how we decided that impact and what evidence we thought through to come to that impact categorization. So we've now published that deliverable, and here we are in 2022. The research stream continues. We're going to be publishing an SDG mapping matrix white paper to accompany the Excel sheet. This SDG mapping report focuses on how electric power companies in North America and a few that are international, but we started with North America since that's more of our member base when it comes to the Strategic Sustainability Science program. But we've now been receiving inquiries about how power companies can map. What are their peers doing? How is the industry looking at the SDGs largely? Because investors and stakeholders are still asking about them. So the white paper provides some information on how power companies are providing initiatives, how they're mapping to specific SDGs. It provides some examples, some key examples, some really specific examples. It also provides a bit of a look at the SDGs from the lens of a North American power company. And it also reflects a lot of the information from the mapping matrix tool when it comes to the different impact categorizations. So that will be published later this year. It'll be available to our members. And as we develop that, currently we're having discussions with members about the process of mapping. And one of the main things that we have to decide when we're talking to members and when they're saying, we're thinking about mapping, but how do we do it? And how much effort does it take? And, is this something we can just map to the goals and say, check, 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 we progress these goals? Or are we required to really go deeper, look at the indicator level, and do the more difficult and nuanced work of looking at 247 indicators and deciding it on your own contextualized impact category? How are we going to, as a company or as an organization, progress these specific indicators? Or maybe we just can't. Maybe we just don't have it in our capacity. So we're now looking at that and in a member to member and type of way. And it's been interesting because it's really, this whole project and this whole process has required a lot of thought exercises, a lot of subject matter expertise, some interviews, and it's really provided a good window into what it takes to look at the SDGs at their most refined indicator level. So we can move ahead with the slides. Now that I've provided that research update, I'm happy to take any questions in the chat, or if anyone wants to come off mute, I am glad to chat about it. And even here, depending on your answers, we can go ahead and look at the results if you guys feel like you've had enough time. But I'm eager to hear if anyone has done mapping. I know in Europe you might have regulatory binds. So I would love for anyone to come off mute and maybe talk about their SDG mapping process or how they're even even considering the SDGs in their organizational operations. So feel free to come off mute for that. I see a
While they think
question in
about
the
their
chat.
responses. Yep, I was going to respond to that question in the chat. Gab, if you want to go ahead and close out the Slido poll so that we can take a look at the results. Elaine, thank you so much for the question about initiatives focused on utility T&D grid sustainability comparable to the European DSO publication. So our sustainability research currently is asset agnostic, which means that we don't focus on one specific area, but we do talk about all of them. So as we think about sustainability goals and sustainability metrics, we are certainly tracking the goals that companies set relating to any and all of the assets that they have. So while we don't have any initiatives focused specifically on utility T&D, I would say that they are captured in the research that we do. There are certainly considerations as we do peer benchmarking as well. The other thing that I can let you know is more and more we are having conversations with our peers across EPRI about sustainability. I had a conversation yesterday with some folks on our distribution team about questions that they're getting from their members about moving sustainability and really thinking about what sustainability means from both a emissions tracking, but also from a circularity of resources standpoint. So thank you so much for directing us to that resource. We're going to take a dig through that. My question back to you would also be, knowing that this sustainable grid charter already exists, do you feel like there is a research gap? Do you feel like there is something missing that EPRI should be thinking about and creating to provide an additional resource for T&D DSOs? And you can obviously take a moment to put that in the chat. Of course, you're welcome to come off of mute and jump in as well. Okay. Gab, what did we see in the Slido? Are you able to share the results with all of us?
I'm trying to, and I'm honestly unsure how to get it to go into the chat since I can't see the chat, but I can go ahead and say we had 5 people respond. 100% of those 5 said yes, their company currently mapped to the SDGs. 80% said that they mapped to the goal level, 40% said to the target, 20 to the indicator. So definitely an overwhelming majority mapping to the goal level. And when we asked, what are your top reasons for mapping to the SDGs? It was an even split between internal and external stakeholders, with 20% saying other. So if anyone who said other to the top reasons for mapping, if you want to drop in the chat what might have driven you, what was your top reason for mapping to the SDGs, we'd love to know more specifically what that other meant. But 40% also said regulatory, but it looks like the main drivers were internal and external stakeholder interest.
Fascinating. And I'm kind of not surprised at all about that so many folks on the line are thinking about SDGs and are actively mapping to them, but also that a lot of that mapping is currently happening at the goal level. As you can imagine, as we went through the thought exercise to do the SDG mapping, thinking about an electric power company, it can be really challenging. Like at the goal level, you see a lot of alignment with efforts that we have underway, even at the target level as well. But when you get down to the indicator level, the way that they're written makes you really kind of go through a conversation with yourself. And we did a nice conversation with our team as well as we thought through what is applicable here and kind of what category does this fall into. And so one of the things that I can say is that we are going to enable you to kind of go through that thought exercise with us as well. So Gab, do you want to introduce the indicator mapping exercise to the group?
Sure. So this is kind of the process I was describing when I said, we went through multiple rounds of subject matter expertise. We had some back and forth, not quite arguments, but maybe some compromises and discussions depending on where your expertise comes from. But we'll take a look at SDG 7, which in my mind is pretty clear in that an electric power company would be able to drive progress on this goal. But when we look at the target level, it also may seem a bit relevant. Seems like power companies may impact this with their core business functions, and looking at the indicator level, you may think the same. But I just I invite you all to walk through this, read through these goals, the target, the indicator, and then we'll go through and you can provide a categorization, and you can see on the right side of the slide, you can see our definitions for these categorizations as you think through it. But this is how we walked through each of the indicators, each of the goals, each of the targets, and I'll when I spoke about that research gap, sometimes you'll see that an indicator, although it may seem like it can directly drive progress, that an electric power company may be able to directly drive progress through core business functions, that the target may not be, or vice versa. The indicator seems kind of like a negligible at times to an electric power company in terms of driving progress on it, but the target might seem extremely relevant to drive progress as an electric power company, or the goal might seem to hit the nail on the head in terms of driving progress as an electric power company. So walking through these together, and taking a moment to read through, I think it lets you peek into the thought exercise. And I'm curious if if this process is similar to some that the 5 who said they did map to the SDGs. This is a similar process that you guys might have taken. Um, or if you did something completely different, please drop in the chat or come off of mute and let me know how you guys did map to the SDGs, because when it comes to our background and our, our R&D, our R&D style, we really felt like the thought sessions, the thought exercises were the best way to provide these categorizations. But so we're going to walk through it now. If everyone could maybe read through this, provide a categorization in the Slido, I'd appreciate it. And we can look at the results. We can look at the results afterwards. I'll try to figure out how to get them on the screen, but also we can
Thanks
look
so
at,
much.
yeah.
Thanks so much, Gab. So as a reminder, if you don't have the poll currently open, you can click on apps and you should see it under sustainability and utility practice. And the current poll is focusing on that SDG 7, so affordable and clean energy, and taking it down to indicator level 7.2.1. So what we're really trying to get you to play with here with us is thinking about renewable energy share in the total final energy consumption. Do you think that for an electric power company, internationally, wherever you may be today, do you think that it is directly tied to core business operations? Do you think that there is an opportunity for a tangential impact through actions tangential to core business operations, or do you think that that company would have a negligible impact on this indicator level?
We got one. Hoping for a few more. Awesome.
I know we got 5 before. We'll see if there's one more. Oh, there it is. Anybody else want to provide? Last call. All right, Gab, what are we thinking?
All right, let's show the results. Let me know if you can see them. Looks like
Direct impact,
100% of us.
100%.
Yep, and that's kind of where we went with it as well. When we provided our reasoning, we said that this indicator could be progressed by the core business functions of a power company or the energy industry, specifically through decarbonization strategies and the increased inclusion of renewable energy in many power companies' generation mix. So you guys are right with us. Oh, looks like we got one more vote as well. So I'm glad to see it. I'll close out this one for now, and we'll open up the one for SDG 17. So we can walk through a very similar process again.
Absolutely. So SDG 17, this one was a little trickier for us. So the first one was kind of a get you working with it, get you thinking about it. SDG 17 is focused on partnerships for the goals, and 16.1 focuses on fixed internet broadband subscriptions per 100 inhabitants by speed. Many of you may have been thinking about the digital divide and how your company or an electric power company can have an impact on bridging the digital divide. It's something that we've certainly talked a lot about during the COVID era, where we've seen people working and learning from home. So thinking about lower income communities and who are challenged to access the internet, there is a gap there. And so we had a lot of great conversations around our table with our collaborating companies about thoughts that they have and projects that they have underway, thinking about, is there a role that they can play in this digital divide conversation? So a little trickier, a thought exercise, but interested to see what you guys think about 17.6.1. Is it direct, tied to core business operations? Do you think that there's an opportunity for a tangential impact? Or do you think that this is a negligible impact for an electric power company?
Yeah. When I was thinking through this, I looked at SDG 17, the broader goal we can see written out. And, I said, you know, this could pertain to the international energy industry. But when we dig deeper and you look at SDG 17, all of the indicators it has, all of the targets, many of the scopes are quantified by number of countries. So that makes the goal and the relevant indicators more difficult to think of from a company point of view. And usually if the scope is number of countries, it almost is, it very well may be inapplicable to a company to map to. So that was kind of our thought process, especially with this, with SDG 17. Many of the indicators used a scope that we were really hesitant to identify as a power company being able to drive progress through the quantitative measure they provided. So looks like we got 4 votes. I think that's enough since we're running out of time here. So I'll show the results. And we've got a pretty interesting distribution here. I think this is exactly the reason why this process is so interesting. You can almost provide evidence for any of these impact categorizations, but ooh, looks like negligible just became tied. Pretty cool. Okay, so we did deem this indicator tangential in our SDG mapping matrix. We decided that electric power companies may have initiatives to address the digital divide or the installation of fiber optics along transmission or distribution corridors while providing electricity for individuals, but that in the greater sense, we couldn't identify evidence that an electric power company would directly drive progress to this indicator. Therefore, tangential and not quite negligible. So I'm so glad we were able to do this exercise. I really appreciate you all participating. And like I said, if you have any type of strategies or ideas about mapping to the SDGs, please drop them in the chat. I would love to read more about it. If you have even reports about it, please drop them in. And I'll give it back to Fiona for now. We can go ahead and talk about the just transition.
Thank you so much, Gab. I appreciate everybody's participation in that exercise. I'd also encourage you, if you want to drop kind of what your thought was that led you to arrive at your category for 17, given that one was a little trickier and kind of split across 3. With that, we are going to move into highlights from EPRI's Just Transition research. So I'm going to hand it back over to Brenda Brickhouse. Brenda?
Yeah, thanks very much, Fiona. We did this work last year and really thinking about, Fiona mentioned the North American Electric Power Research Industry Sustainability Priorities work that we've done for a number of years. And Just Transition emerged as a sustainability priority in the work that we did in 20 and 21. So thinking about that, thinking about the changes that we are going through, we wanted to really look into what are the opportunities, what are those implications when decarbonization in particular significantly impacts a fossil-dependent community. Certainly we think about jobs, we think about community vitality, and we really wanted to understand what sorts of approaches, what are leading practices, how can communities be successful in working through that transition to a more sustainable economy. And so we did that work largely through literature review, looked at many sources and case studies. There's been a lot of work really from across the globe, much of the work in Canada and in Europe as well as in the US, and really thinking about how are folks approaching these kinds of transition? What's working in communities and jurisdictions across the globe? How can folks enter into some of these transitions and come out the other side that much better for it, right? I'll point out the definition of just transition as a sustainability priority is on the right-hand side in the lighter blue box. Equitable access to the benefits and protections from the risks associated with the shift to a low carbon economy for workers and communities. And thinking about that, this particular body of work focused, as I said, on fossil dependent communities, but there are also issues we recognize with the transition in terms of affordability and energy access as well. This particular body of work did not focus on that, but we are looking to focus on that with future research work. So if we can flip to the next slide, we'll show you a little bit about that framework that we've been, I failed to mention one thing. We are also working currently on developing a framework for economic analysis to be able to parse and better understand what those impacts are so that a given community could indeed be able to approach mitigation and opportunities to advance using that information. So what have we learned, right? So you know, the real upshot of this is that every community is unique. There's no standard set of policies or processes that are going to take a community from where they are to a more sustainable socioeconomic place through this clean energy transition. That said, there are certainly some key learnings, some key best practices that we were able to identify. Cannot overemphasize the importance that we understand from starting early. This was reinforced through many of the case studies and many of the folks who have been plowing this ground before us, if you will. Identifying those economic, political, social factors present in the community. How are they going to be changed by this transition? Very important to be able to start those assessments and conversations early. Building capacity and coalitions. Very much as we've talked about before, and there's a theme with the work that I do, other stakeholders, public authorities, you know, the engagement of the community, of the government that supports that community, of the organizations that are present in that community. This certainly does take all of those folks working toward and through these transitions together. Commitments, right? We think about those, we need to understand what's needed, and we need to make sure throughout this process that commitments are made and we understand who's responsible or stepping up to be able to fulfill the different needs, the different steps in the transition. Those need to be very clear. It's almost like doing chores at home, right? If it's everybody's job, nobody does it. But certainly thinking about establishing commitments and being able to understand who's responsible for what and how they're approaching their part of this task. And lastly, it will require strategic investments from the likely from the power company, from the community itself, from the government, from institutions that support that community, such as academic institutions for training. So certainly those strategic investments are going to be a piece of it. And you see the circle on the other side. You know, that it really starts at the top with transition acceptance. It's not unusual for various factions and factors in a community to think differently about the transition that's coming. Folks may or may not recognize it for what it is. They may be actively fighting against the change. Or frankly, they may be complacent and think, well, it'll just be okay. But really understanding that accepting the transition and what the challenges are is a very important goal for any community to successfully achieve a just transition. Certainly, economic development is an overall goal. Stable employment is a goal. Replacing to the extent that the fossil facility paid taxes or otherwise contributed to the local government and the local economy, particularly the local government, that replacing that revenue is something that's going to be important for that entity. Certainly environmental reclamation is a piece of it. We need to be able to understand that and thinking about all of those goals and making sure that we have steps and plans to achieve them is important for actually getting through to the other side in a more sustainable way. So that realistic assessment, right? I mean, so it's, you know, the opportunity for the community, the people in the community, as well as the institutions and organizations to have a realistic idea of where they are and where they need to go will be critically important. So let's take a look at the next slide.
I believe that is the last one, and that's all we really have time for as well. So thank you, Brenda, for leading us right into the end of it. Thank you all who are able to join us today for an hour to talk about these phenomenally important topics. And thanks to the team who helped develop this conversation and lead this research as well. You can reach out to all of us using the sustainability@EPRI.com email address. We'd be happy to talk more about the research that we do and our ongoing efforts. I hope you all have a wonderful day and a wonderful rest of your week. Take care. Gab, would you mind stopping the recording, please? Thank you.